This new drug could help end the HIV epidemic, but U.S. funding cuts are killing its rollout. Lenacapavir, a twice-yearly injection that prevents HIV transmission, was named the breakthrough medicine of 2024. But without U.S. foreign aid dollars, its delivery to millions worldwide is under threat. To a lifetime on the frontiers of the fight against HIV, Linda Gale Becker could finally see the end of the epidemic in sight. For decades, HIV experts had dreamed of an elusive vaccine to block the ongoing chain of infections, which still sees more than 1 million people worldwide contract the virus annually. Becker, a 62-year-old medical professor from the University of Cape Town, had helped identify a drug that could do just that. But now, thanks to the Trump administration's executive orders, it's unclear when, or possibly even ever, this breakthrough medicine will see the light of day. At the AIDS 2024 conference held in Munich last July, Becker had triumphantly unveiled the results of a momentous clinical trial she had led, called Purpose 1. It showed that Lenacapavir, an antiretroviral developed by the pharmaceutical company Gilead Sciences, could prevent sexual transmission of HIV with 100% efficacy by disrupting the function of the virus's capsid protein, which allows it to replicate. Even more remarkably, compared with existing daily pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP, pills, which do a similar job. Injections are only required every 6 months. While not strictly a vaccine, Lenacapavir promises to be the next best thing. It was named as 2024's Breakthrough of the Year by the prestigious journal Science, and Gilead promptly committed to manufacturing 10 million doses by 2026, enough to treat 2.5 million people, ahead of anticipated regulatory approval later this year. Last month, a new study revealed that while regulators in 53 countries have approved cabotegravir, rollout has been painfully slow. Generic versions of the jab are not expected to become available until 2027. In Africa and Asia, where cabotegravir is most needed, the only access so far has been through so-called Phase 4 or implementation science studies, which attempt to understand more about the real-world challenges of offering a new drug by dispensing it to a few thousand people, and also as a consequence of orders coming out of the White House. A number of these Phase 4 studies have abruptly ceased. They're very concentrated in East and Southern Central Africa, says Becker. Some of them were PEPFAR-supported. And with the stop work order, these studies have ground to a halt. The frustration for researchers like Becker is that while long-acting injectables are extremely effective at blocking HIV transmission, to end the epidemic, their rollout needs to be as rapid and as wide-reaching as possible. She points out that to prevent over 1 million new infections each year, these jabs need to be targeted at HIV hotspots and administered on a scale of millions, exactly as the plan with Lenacapavir was proposing. We've seen with both cabotegravir and oral PrEP that if you get a new tool, but roll it out gently, that will not impact the epidemic, says Ngure. The number of new infections still outpaces the impact of the tool. You need something which is potent and to roll it out fast. With Lenacapavir, things were supposed to be different. Gilead has partnered with 6 generic drug makers, which have been licensed to produce enough of an off-label supply of Lenacapavir to cover 120 countries. Estimates have suggested that if the global demand exceeded more than 20 million doses, the manufacturing costs could fall to just $35 to $40 per person per year. However, Becker says that PEPFAR was expected to be a significant buyer, and without its financial clout the commercial viability of manufacturing generic Lenacapavir at vast scales is in doubt. It requires a nice healthy demand to ensure that for each of the generic companies, it's going to be worth their while, says Becker. We are all hoping that governments, across sub-Saharan Africa, are writing the generic product into their budgets for the future, but the reality is that in the interim, we were relying on donor funding. Even my country, South Africa, which has a good GDP and funds 80% of its HIV response, is already purchasing antiretrovirals for 6 million individuals annually. I would imagine it will take them some years to be able to mobilize the money for Lenacapavir as well. With PEPFAR seemingly now focused primarily on the treatment of existing patients, at the expense of prevention, clinicians like Namathemba Chandawana, a physician scientist at the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation in South Africa, are concerned that the infection rate will begin to rise rather than fall, something which will have a marked public health impact across the African continent and beyond. Speaking at last week's NCD Alliance Forum in Kigali, Chandawana explained that the consequences of new infections are not solely related to HIV itself. Research is increasingly showing that people living with long-term HIV infections, even those controlled by antiretroviral treatment, are at a greater risk of developing metabolic conditions such as hypertension, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, a disease burden which is already on the rise in sub-Saharan Africa. HIV itself disrupts your metabolism, as do many of the antiretrovirals, says Chandawana. We see the same chronic diseases in people living with HIV as we do in the general population, but at an earlier age and in an accelerated fashion. Because of this, there is also a need for a new generation of HIV treatments, and one concept being explored was to use Lenacapavir as a foundation of future combination therapies for those already with the virus. As well as potentially alleviating some of the metabolic side effects, it was hoped that this could lead to treatment protocols that did not require HIV-infected individuals to take daily medication. Various ideas have been mooted, says Becker. Could you combine bi-monthly cabotegravir with a 6-monthly Lenacapavir injection, as a form of viral suppression, so you'd only come in 6 times a year for treatment, and it would all be injectable? There's a weekly antiretroviral pill in the works. And could you combine that with a 6-monthly injectable? This could be very liberating for people, as they tell us all the time how stigmatizing it is to need to take daily medication. Yet many of these studies are now in doubt, as Becker says they were expected to be funded by U.S. resources. It's not just PEPFAR, we're also worried about restrictions being placed on other sorts of research funding, such as the National Institutes of Health, she says. It's just going to get harder to innovate and move progress forward. According to Nguyen, there is still hope that other donors may emerge who can support the global fund in procuring Lenacapavir, while Becker says she is exploring new options for funding HIV prevention and research through European agencies, and possibly donor funding from sources in Scandinavia, Japan, and Australia. At the same time, she believes that the events of the past month have illustrated that African countries need to become capable of funding more preventative efforts themselves. Somehow Africa needs to step up and contribute to the fight, she says. I think that's the big question. How much we can also contribute on this continent through countries which haven't necessarily been able to cover a big amount of research and development but in the future need to. At the same time, she is afraid that without the same resources coming from the US, the unique opportunity provided by Lenacapavir could be lost. It's incredible that this has happened just as we've had the breakthrough, she says. I think this is going to set us back many years and ultimately cost a lot more in public health spending. Because ultimately, if we can bring this epidemic under control more quickly, it's going to save the planet more money in the long run, and save lives too.